Hey, did I just see Sif being carried toward the docks by frost giants? This day keeps getting stranger. Not sure why we seem to be hosting an Asgardian winter festival, but maybe you guys should give her a hand?
That dialogue takes place immediately after we stop the train from crashing, so we have to do this next mission right away. And it is the third and final dungeon in the game, though again not the end of the game, because we still have one more boss fight left. It is also the least interesting dungeon for me because it doesn't have a boss and it doesn't have any lasers. So it's all just about the hitting. There is a bit in the middle that I think is supposed to replace the lasers, but as you'll see, that doesn't work. Something that is at least fun about the start of this dungeon is the ability to easily knock the frost giants into the water. Now it is true if you throw them onto any surface they will die immediately, but knocking or throwing them into the water is just more fun. I'll probably forget to mention this if I don't mention it right now, but I hope you're not planning on seeing MODOK ever again. Because even though his drones are still around and so are his weather machines, we're not going to see him anymore. We never find him, we never capture him. He's entirely missing from the rest of the game. And that's kind of unfortunate, but it's not like the game had impeccable pacing to begin with. I do want to thank the game for taking us to one of the few interesting looking places in this version of New York City. But I suppose the reason there's so few of them is because they were manufactured specifically for battles like this to take place. I'm honestly not all that keen on how many frost giants you have to fight outside, when after we get inside we're going to have to fight so many more, and then so many more again a few minutes after that. Maybe the issue isn't this fight outside, since the fight outside is the most interesting part. Maybe the issue is the fight indoors.
Looks like they've taken Sif to the harbor. You're in for one heck of a fight.
I am ready to battle. Well fought.
Recover Sif at all costs. It's likely she knows something about Asgard's least favorite son.
I want to say immediately to the game's credit that if we didn't figure out how to cheese the game so easily, these fights inside this building might actually be a little bit difficult. And it is sad that it's so easily broken by both Thor and Iron Man, because these dungeons are when the game most tries to be like a regular action game. That makes sense because the combat was handled by Ninja Theory. But if you're familiar with Ninja Theory, you also know they're capable of much better. I mean, they're obviously worse and more boring 3D beat-em-ups. I'm not even going to pretend that's not the case. But there are also much better games that you could zone out and distract yourself with than this one. Maybe the target demographic for this game is just a beat-em-up that you can play with your kid, and this probably hits that demographic at least. Something I will say about the layout in this warehouse is that it makes it reasonably difficult to dodge enemy projectiles. A lot of the enemies are perfectly okay with staying back really far and just hurling ice spears at you. And of course it could easily be solved by just getting them all together, or simply moving closer to them. But if you're too lazy to do that, like I was here, then yeah, sure, it's a little bit difficult to dodge the projectiles. I want to point out while I still can that this indoor section and the one in the other warehouse, the environments seem really oddly realistic. The game has a pretty cartoony aesthetic on the whole, but these indoor areas seem like they're from a completely different game entirely. That could be intentional to some degree, I have no way of knowing, but it's still very odd. So a bunch of shipping containers fell over, and now we have these sweet snowmobiles to drive around this weird Tony Hawk ice wasteland with. There's a whole ton of ramps and everything. The problem is that I don't like how the snowmobile controls, and I can fly. So I'm having a hard time understanding why I would want to bother with this, When I don't get anything for doing it the hard way, the ramps don't give me anything when I jump them, and even if I wanted the collectibles that are lying around here, I could just fly into them. Maybe the point in this area isn't just to be a little breather in the middle of the dungeon, but it's rather for kids to goof around in for a while. But then it should probably be part of the open world and not part of this linear dungeon. You know, that would probably make it more fun to play around with, and make it seem less like an obstacle. Like, if you were playing a regular action game and your mission was to go rescue someone, and in the middle of rescuing someone there was this giant Tony Hawk ice wasteland, would you stop to dick around in it, or would you go and rescue the person? Because when you put someone in the mindset that they're supposed to be overcoming obstacles to reach a goal, it's hard to get out of that. If that even was the point. For all I know, that could have been intended as an obstacle, and it was just a really bad obstacle. Anyway, this indoor, icy, cavernous part of the dungeon is very special for me, because this, in my original run, is when I unlocked Thor's cheesing attack. And it took me about all of a minute to figure out how easy it was to cheese everyone with it. I do appreciate the change in scenery again, because I'm a pretty easy guy to keep occupied, I'm not gonna lie. If it's a beat-em-up or a third-person shooter and the scenery changes on me enough, I'm gonna be fine, even if I fight the same enemies a whole lot. This doesn't mean it's good or acceptable game design, but it means that I personally am okay with it and I think it's fun. But I mean, don't let anyone even try to compare a game like this to Dynasty Warriors or anything like that. Those games are leagues above what this one does. This one's pretty basic on all fronts. And yeah, I am calling the playset its own game, but I've been treating it like its own game this entire time, so you shouldn't really be surprised. It's certainly structured like one. There's really nothing that connects it to the rest of Disney Infinity at all. I do own the Spider-Man playset, and I've yet to play that, but I'm going to be disappointed if it's not at least as entertaining as Friend or Foe. That's not a high benchmark. I mean, this right now isn't as entertaining as Friend or Foe, but it also doesn't have Spider-Man in it, so you gotta knock off a few points for that. You're probably noticing that we're seeing a whole ton of the more large frost giants than ever before. And this is meant to increase the difficulty significantly, but it isn't doing that. But at the very least, we are going to encounter the final enemy type very soon. So that should spice things up at least a little bit, right? The reason I did that was to show off the final hit of Thor's combo that I bought for no reason. It's not as good as the attack that we bought specifically to cheese enemies, but at least you got to see it once. Truly a fearsome foe. I take back every criticism I've ever had about this game.
Lady Sif, for what purpose have you traveled to Midgard?
I've come to warn you of your traitorous brother's plot. The Frost Giants tried to silence me, but as you can see, I'm not so easily thwarted.
So what's Loki's endgame here?
Odin believes he is gathering items to build a new casket of ancient winters.
This is troubling news. Were he to succeed, this world would be covered in eternal ice.
And all this time we thought he was just building a shortwave radio. Go figure.
5,